Should we trust Trump with the keys to the economy for another 4 years? This unbiased, objective, expert analysis of Trump's past and future economic policies will help you decide for yourself. This video isn't pro or anti-Trump. It's anti-political BS. And there's one coming about Biden too. So let's dive into Trump's record and see if he deserves a passing grade. It makes sense to start with the most important driver of the economy, jobs. Here's what Trump said when he was running for president.
I will be the greatest jobs president that God ever created. I tell you that.
And was he? Not exactly. Here's a chart that shows total employment in the US before and after he was elected. Basically, he just inherited a good jobs market from Obama and continued the trend until 2020, which we obviously can't blame him for. You know, a lot goes into job creation besides what the president does, so they never deserve all the credit or the blame, but we can look at the success of some of his more specific policies to create jobs. On those, it's hard to give anything more than a failing grade. He put tariffs of 30% on solar panels and 50% on washing machines to protect American workers. Unfortunately, his solar tariffs actually cost 62,000 Americans their jobs. The washing machine tariffs created a few jobs, but their main impact was just to inflate washing machine prices. Each new job created ended up costing US consumers $815,000. Not a great deal. His steel and aluminum tariffs cost Americans another 75,000 jobs, specifically in manufacturing, the main area he was trying to boost. If that wasn't enough, they also raised prices for consumers and led to retaliation from other countries. Overall, manufacturing employment actually stalled out in 2019 after many years of consistent growth, largely because of Trump's protectionist policies that picked up in 2018. All in all, the Carnegie Endowment estimated that his trade policies cost nearly 250,000 Americans their jobs. The US economy did not create a lot of jobs because of Trump. It created jobs in spite of him. Basically, every job-related policy he put in place backfired. For that reason, Trump gets an F on jobs. Jobs weren't the only reason Trump put tariffs and other protectionist measures in place, though. He was also obsessed with the trade deficit.
We have a massive trade deficit. Out of control trade deficit. Our trade deficit is massive.
The trade deficit is just the difference between how much a country imports and exports. You see, Trump thought that because we were importing more than we were exporting, we were losing on trade. But this is the precise thing that had one of the least biased and most highly respected publications in the world, which happens to be called The Economist, to call Donald Trump economically illiterate. Honestly, you don't need to be an economist to understand this. It's just basic common sense. The US is a wealthy country, which means two things. One, we can afford to buy more things than other countries. And two, it's more expensive to make things here than it is in other places because our workers get paid a lot. So we should be importing more than we're exporting. If anything, that means we're winning. Think about it this way. Would you rather be the person ordering food for delivery or the person making the food? The main reason that tariffs don't work is because it's the consumers who end up paying for them. Tariffs are basically an indirect tax on the American people because what really happens is that foreign businesses simply raise their prices to keep their profits the same. For example, iPhones are assembled in China. The only company that realistically has the scale to produce as many as quickly as they need them is a Taiwanese company called Foxconn. So if the US puts a 25% tariff on imports of electronics from China, do you think Apple is going to start producing iPhones in the US? No, they can't. They're just going to jack up the price of the iPhone. And are you going to switch to Samsung because the iPhone price went up? The vast majority of Americans will just pay more for their next iPhone. That's how tariffs work in practice. They're a tax on the US consumer. They slow down the economy, they cost jobs, and they reduce investment. And those are just the direct impacts. But there are also many other unintended consequences of Trump's protectionism. I'll give you 3 of them here. First, protectionist policies lead to more lobbying. If the government is handing out unfair advantages or disadvantages to certain industries, you better believe companies are going to spend handsomely to tip the scales in their favor. This flies directly in the face of Trump's claim to drain the swamp.
Under my administration, we're fighting against the lobbyists.
I didn't know the way to fight against them was to hire them all. So much for draining the swamp. The next unintended consequence of Trump's protectionist trade policies was retaliation. Soybean and pork farmers were hurt by China's retaliation. Whiskey and corn farmers were hurt by the EU's retaliation. Coffee bean farmers were hurt by Canada's retaliation, and so forth and so on. And that brings us to our last unintended consequences of Trump's protectionism. it pisses off our allies. He actually claimed national security as the reason for some of the tariffs on Canada. Can you imagine Canada attacking the United States? I don't think he realizes that what gives the US its power, more so than our economy or anything else, is our allies. He repeatedly broke international laws with his unprompted attacks on them, hamstrung the World Trade Organization by blocking the appointment of new judges, and threatened to withdraw from NATO, which is the main security pact that keeps us out of a world war. Trump also ramped up the use of severe financial sanctions on countries like Iran, North Korea, Russia, Venezuela, and others. In this area, I'm more on board. Some people have been critical of these policies, which Biden has continued for being an abuse of power, and they say they've led countries to try to dethrone the dollar. Well, maybe, but I think we should also consider that financial weaponry causes a lot fewer deaths than most other kinds. And in most cases, these countries were sponsoring terrorism. So they kind of asked for it. As for dethroning the dollar, good luck with that. On this one, I'm good with Trump's approach, and I don't think it put the US economy at risk. Maybe it even reduced the likelihood of another terrorist attack without sending any troops into harm's way. We'll never know. Next, let's look at the impact of some of his trade deals. One of Trump's major claims during his campaign was that he was such a great deal maker. He used these supposedly epic deal-making skills to renegotiate NAFTA and rebrand it as the USMCA.
I have long contended that NAFTA was perhaps the worst trade deal ever made.
But basically, the USMCA was just NAFTA, supposedly the worst deal ever made, plus elements of Obama's Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Trump also supposedly didn't like, along with some protectionism and a few left-leaning labor and environmental restrictions. The government's own estimates show that the changes were likely to weaken our economy. That is, unless you buy their claim that somehow forcing business to learn and adapt to a new trade deal after decades of stability would somehow reduce uncertainty and give the economy a huge boost. Honestly, that notion is completely ridiculous. That's like saying that moving to a place where you don't know anyone and having to make all new friends will somehow make your social life go more smoothly. Hey, how you doing? His Phase 1 agreement with Japan was also basically just taken right from Obama's TPP, which he supposedly hated. When it comes to the impact on the economy, his trade negotiations just really didn't have much impact, and what impact they did have was mostly negative. More regulatory changes, more bureaucracy, more trade restrictions, all these things have negative impacts on our economy and are exactly the kinds of things he said he wanted to fight against in his campaign. When it all comes down to it, from his job-killing, friend-losing, economy-weakening tariffs to his failure on his trade deals, almost every one of his policies put us in a worse position than we were in before. On trade, Trump gets an F. Next, let's look at the impacts of his efforts on deregulation. All else equal, deregulation is generally good for the economy. Trump promised to eliminate 2 old regulations for every new one. And he did that, but a lot of the ones he eliminated were completely pointless. Like, for example, he removed a restriction on the import of lamb meat from Uruguay. Wow, what an accomplishment. Where he did make a bigger impact was in reducing a lot of environmental regulations. I'm not here to assess environmental impact, only economic impact, and that was positive. But his claims that he saved $200 billion in regulatory costs are complete BS. First, he's counting imaginary savings from deregulations that were struck down in court and never actually happened. Second, he's not counting the increased costs for many of his new regulations that he excluded from the calculation. What he won't admit is that while he decreased regulation in some areas, he also increased regulation significantly with his tariffs and trade restrictions. Those were extremely costly for the government, businesses, and consumers. And with respect to the regulatory cost savings he claimed, anything related to national security didn't count. On deregulation, Trump gets a C. And now, everyone's favorite topic, immigration. Everyone's favorite topic, immigration. How about the economic impacts of Trump's immigration policies? Well, his wall project turned out to be a giant waste of taxpayer money. He declared a national emergency to take $3.6 billion from the military budget to pay for it, which looked fishy enough given that he took a few weeks to decide if there was actually an emergency. Then, if there was any doubt, he was quoted later saying, "I didn't need to do this."
I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this.
He also took a couple billion more dollars from programs that were designed to stop drug trafficking. But of course, the wall never actually got finished. So essentially, he spent billions of dollars, made no progress on fighting illegal immigration, but did manage to let more drugs into the country and put new restrictions on legal immigration, which also harmed the economy. At one point, he tried to completely close the border with Mexico. Not only would that have done nothing to fight illegal immigration, since illegal immigrants aren't usually driving through the regular border checks, but it also would have been disastrous for the US economy. Thankfully, he wasn't successful. From an economic perspective, the key thing to understand on immigration is that we have an aging population in the US. That will be a significant long-term threat to our economy without enough immigration. The border gets all the attention, But I'm more focused on his effort to limit legal immigration. That was incredibly stupid. And mainly for that reason, Trump gets a D- for the economic impacts of his immigration policies. The last area we'll dive into was Trump's fiscal policies, like government spending and his tax cuts. During his campaign, Trump claimed that he would put us on a path to eliminating the national debt in 8 years. In reality, he injected it with a giant shot of steroids. The budget deficit refers to the amount of money the government spends that it doesn't have. Usually, the budget deficit expands in bad times because the government is doing extra to support the economy, and it shrinks or swings to a surplus in good times because the government doesn't need to do anything extra to support the economy. And they should get plenty of tax dollars coming in when the economy is strong. Trump inherited a strong economy. Unemployment was at a 50-year low, but he implemented a $1.9 billion tax cut anyway. The budget deficit increased during every year of his presidency, even in the good times. By late 2019, it was around 5.5%, which was basically unheard of outside of recessions. Then 2020 hit and it skyrocketed even more. It had to, so you can't blame him for that. But the debt would have been a lot lower if he hadn't wasted so much money in 2017 when the economy didn't need it. He also handed out stimulus checks that in many cases were more than people were making. I'm not gonna fault him for the rampant fraud or sending checks to 1 million dead people, because some of that chaos is expected when you're scrambling to save the economy. But I think he could have designed a policy that didn't pay people more money than they were already earning to not work. That seems a little excessive. Overall, I think he did reasonably well in handling the economy during the festivities of 2020, all things considered. His tax cuts, however, were an utter failure. First, like I said before, they came at a time when the economy was strong and didn't need them. Second, they cut taxes for the upper class more than the middle class. And third, his cap on the mortgage interest and property tax deductions made homes less affordable. That might not be a popular take among people who think they're just tax breaks for the rich, but that's the reality. It's not only rich people that own homes. And one of the ways you can become rich when you're not is by buying a home instead of renting. His tax cuts made that harder and actually resulted in a tax increase on many middle-class Americans. Yet, while he was making it harder for the middle class to buy homes and raising taxes on some of them, he also doubled the estate tax exemption, which already didn't apply to people inheriting less than $5.6 million. So people inheriting $10 million got a huge tax break, while middle-class homeowners got the shaft. Oh, and by the way, it increased our federal budget deficit by about $2 trillion. Trump did okay in 2020, mostly because it was so chaotic that anything other than crashing the economy was a success. But before that, he did an absolutely terrible job with fiscal spending. He stimulated the economy when it didn't need it. He formulated tax cuts that raised taxes on a lot of middle-class Americans while lowering them on people inheriting $10 million. And most importantly, he drastically increased the national debt when he ran on a platform of drastically decreasing it. On fiscal policy, I can't go higher than an F. And what does he want to do in 2024? He's got a lot of really dumb ideas that will never work out, like implementing a huge new tax on university endowments to create a national university and building 10 brand new cities from scratch, neither of which is needed and neither of which he has a realistic plan to pay for. But the main 2024 policy I want to focus on that trumps all others, he wants to put a 10% tariff on every single item coming into the US and much higher tariffs on some of them. We already know his tariffs completely backfired in his first term, but now he's doubling down anyway. Everyone but him knows it's a terrible idea. The Republican-leaning American Action Forum said it would have broad negative consequences for the US economy. Janet Yellen said it would boost inflation. The Tax Foundation estimated it would effectively raise taxes on US consumers by over $300 billion per year, not including retaliatory tariffs from other countries, which would surely come in droves. This will lead to massive inflation, job losses, and business disruption. Basically like his other tariffs, but on a much larger scale. I think this would have a legitimate chance to crash the global economy and do irreparable damage to the global standing of the United States. We've already seen him fail in almost every single economic policy he implemented during his first term. And his 2024 proposals are basically just even more radical versions of what he did in his first term. On the economy, for his first term, Trump gets an F. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like he's learned much since then. My next video will be on Biden and his economic policies. So if you want to be notified when that comes out, hit that subscribe button and also hit the bell next to it and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the Biden video.